This is my engine swapped, turbocharged 1988 Toyota pickup. I recently took it to the drag strip to see how fast it was, and in the process, I broke it. Pretty bad. Let's get into it. For anyone unfamiliar, this is my 1988 Toyota pickup. It's got a 2RZ from a 99 Tacoma swapped in. It's turbocharged. I recently manual transmission swapped it, put it on the dyno where it made 295 horsepower and 365 foot-pounds of torque to the rear wheels. I then decided to take it to the track to see what kind of times it would do in a quarter mile, where I broke pretty much everything. It went from making 13 to 14 pounds of boost to making about 6 pounds of boost. It started breaking up real bad, and the transmission sounds like it is full of gravel. So we're gonna fix this thing up. We're gonna pull it in, we're gonna figure out why it's running like crap, we're gonna fix the cracked exhaust manifold so it makes proper boost, and we're gonna replace the transmission in this thing with one that hopefully doesn't sound like it is full of gravel. First things first, we've got this thing up in the air in the rear, we've got the hood popped, and we're gonna look into the massive exhaust leak on the turbo manifold, why it's stumbling all over itself under boost, and if we can hear the transmission rattle in neutral with no load, let alone in first or second gear with over 350 foot-pounds of torque going through it. It's kind of hard to hear much besides this massive exhaust leak. But if you hop under it, that rhythmic knocking sound is in fact the transmission bearings eating themselves. It is really bad and prominent in first through third. Fourth gear is almost silent, and fifth gear it's hard to tell because there's usually so much road and wind noise that you can't hear much. But I've got a really good feeling that that's going to be the countershaft bearings on the transmission, and that would mean I need a full transmission rebuild. Luckily, I have got a transmission I'm going to be throwing in this thing that should be good to go. One of the harder things to recreate is the crazy stumble this thing has when it gets into any kind of boost. It just falls flat on its face, starts running like absolute garbage, and it's hard to even maintain 70 miles an hour on the freeway. Let's see if you can see the crack in the video that is going pretty well all the way around my wastegate and up into the turbo. I've already re-welded this manifold once, and I think that there's just a big issue with the fact that I didn't have 220 on my TIG welder. It's kind of a big issue. I was welding with 110, max of 120 amps. Really doesn't cut it for the schedule 10 I'm working with, and not only that, but I'm not gonna say I'm a master TIG welder by any means. This manifold's held up real good, and it took a ton of abuse, but when I turned the boost up and was trying to get it dialed in for the dyno, I ended up pushing about 25 pounds of boost through this thing on a few different occasions. And I think the heat combined with the pressure just was not good for this. And on top of that, I don't have any sort of turbo bracing or support. So we've got a pretty bad turbo manifold leak and a transmission that's rattling pretty severely. Not only that, but there's a hesitation I can't seem to recreate while I'm here in the garage. But I'm going to look into spark plugs, wires, and coil packs for that because I have not changed the spark plugs on this thing since I initially did the turbo build. That's messed up. That's not good. I'd say that has a significant impact on the runnability of this engine, and also scares me for what could have gone through the cylinder, knowing that that spark plug looks like it possibly broke off in there or melted off in there. Since the engine seems to have ingested part of the number 3 spark plug, I'm gonna go ahead and whip out one of my least favorite tools, the compression tester. I'm gonna throw the compression tester on this engine and see the health of every cylinder, but specifically cylinder number 3 to see if it's absolutely destroyed on the inside. Went ahead and tapped into the starter circuit just on this plug right here so I can crank the engine over without being in the car. And we're gonna see what this thing does as far as compression numbers. Cylinder 1. $145, that's a really good number. Cylinder number 2. 135, also a really good number. I'm gonna go to cylinder number 4 before I do the cylinder that's bad, just because I want to know the bad news last. Right at 130. Now the scary cylinder. $115. Try that again. Yep, 115. Okay. I guess I'm gonna see if it's bad rings, and I'm gonna throw just a little bit of oil in there and see if that improves it. Half a cap's worth of oil. Like 119, closer to 120, but not a ton different. I mean, so minusculely different, still just under 120. 145 to 120 or so is about 25 psi different. They say you want it within 10 to 15%. It's closer to 20%. I'm gonna send this. We're gonna go ahead and move forward, fix the exhaust manifold, replace the transmission, put some new spark plugs in it, maybe even go 1 temp cooler on the spark plugs just to hopefully avoid them melting and breaking off again. But all in all, could have been way worse. After a bit of fighting it, I got the turbo manifold off, and it's way worse than I expected. So that's fun. On the top, I could see that there was a crack down the front of it, so I knew it wasn't great, and I took the mirror and I could see there was crack down below. But what I couldn't see was this absolutely massive crack that goes all the way around the backside of the wastegate flange, up this side, and up the backside. 3 of the 4 sides of this turbo were completely cracked, getting ready to fall off. I am so surprised the turbo didn't fall off. But after assessing a little bit under the hood, I think I figured out what's going on. Under the hood, you can see how close the exhaust is to the frame rail. There's really not much room at all between the exhaust and the frame rail. And the engine, when under load with a lot of torque, would be pivoting that way. So if that exhaust is hitting the frame rail, the turbo is going to be the thing that is stopping the engine from rotating more. All of that pressure is going to be put onto the turbo manifold, and if you look at it and think about it, it would be pushing the turbo manifold like this, trying to pull the bottom apart and push the top together. So it would make sense why the wastegate and turbo were breaking off at the same time, because they are both attached to the exhaust, whereas this is not. And since this turbo manifold is a log style, all of the air is converging right there, which means that's going to be the hottest point. And on top of that being the hottest point, I've seen this thing glowing bright red when I get off the highway at night. So I'm sure this manifold gets close to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just going to make everything weaker. And the welds were the weak spot and they broke. So it is what it is, but I think it's fixable, and I'm gonna go ahead, TIG weld this back up after cleaning it real good, and then I'm gonna see if I can do something about this exhaust hitting the frame rail to hopefully alleviate this issue from happening again. Less than ideal, less than fortunate, but I think we can fix it. Here we've got the welds all finished up. I went ahead and I welded all the way around the bottom, all the way around the wastegate, all the way around the top even, and I laid a nice fat bead. I had 220 this time. Last time I fixed this thing, the 220 plug was on its way, but it was supposed to show up the day I was supposed to leave for Denver to go meet that dude in blue, and I just couldn't push the time limit that far, so I welded it back together with 110. Hopefully the 220 gives me better penetration and it holds better, and I'm gonna go ahead, jump under the car, and get the transmission pulled out. Look at that, we've got the transmission pulled out. Can't really hear anything just spinning it over by hand, but it's out, so I can go ahead, grab the good transmission, and start transferring some parts over. The good transmission I've got doesn't have a bell housing, and I'm not exactly sure what it looks like. I got it in a plastic bag, so I'm gonna go check it out, bring it in, and we're gonna compare the two, make sure everything looks good. Here is my new to me used W59 two-wheel drive. Hopefully it looks good. I'm gonna go ahead, get it out of the bag, start inspecting it, start transferring parts over so we can get it reinstalled. Smells so clean. This came from a 98 4Runner, it looks like. Definitely has the same shifter setup. Everything looks good so far. Time to start moving things over. Look at that. And we've got everything transferred over, and we've got a 98 4Runner trans ready to go into this thing. So, should be good to go. Hopefully there's no more weird surprises. I'm gonna have to pull that trans mount off to get it up into the truck. But other than that, we're ready to throw this thing back together. Woo! Time to get this thing back together again. Look at me. I am the transmission jack now. Oh, it's always fun. It's always a nice workout. Bench pressing a transmission into the car. Got the transmission wrapped up, all the bell housing bolts in, the clutch slave cylinder in, the cross member, the drive shaft, everything. So all we have left is to wrap up the top of this engine. I went ahead and I had this manifold on a spare head while I welded it just to try and keep it as straight as possible, which I'm not sure how well it comes across on camera. This thing's got a tad bit of warp to it, but we're ready to throw this thing back on the engine and start reinstalling the turbo and the turbo kit. And then we should be good to fire this thing up with no more boost leak, a good transmission, and new spark plugs. All right, and we've got some NGK spark plugs to throw in this thing so we can finally get it finished up, wrapped up, and see if we fixed all of our issues. We've got a welded turbo manifold, new spark plugs that don't have the strap melted off, and a new transmission in this thing. So it should be dialed in and ready to rip. got this thing wrapped up. Everything's put back together. Intake, new plugs, turbo manifolds welded up. Should be good to start up. So I'm gonna jump in it and see what it sounds like. I'm a big fat liar face. I need to get the shifter back in before I can actually get this thing wrapped up. So close, yet so far away. That's a lot better. We have an actual shifter in here. Let's get the shift knob on. Starting to feel like it could actually be complete. Now let's see what this thing sounds like. I hear a massive exhaust leak. Ah, it's leaking out the back of the manifold, I think. I think it runs pretty good. It's pretty hazy in here, probably from it running kind of rich, but I think we're doing a ton better. And now we just need to tighten that turbo manifold, even though it's as tight as I could possibly get it. But now it's nice and hot, so it'll probably be a little more malleable, easier to tighten down. Bad news. I think I stripped a very important stud for the exhaust manifold. The one on the bottom in the back, the hardest one to get to, an important one because there's only two on the bottom, seems to be stripped, which is just going to be a royal pain in the ass. I'm gonna have to take the entire manifold off to fix it. One step forward, two steps back. Last night we left off with a pretty nasty exhaust leak because there was a stripped exhaust bolt. So this morning I went ahead, I already replaced it. It was the one in the most difficult spot to get to, down under the runners in the very back. But I pulled it out, I replaced it, and hopefully it sounds better. As long as the exhaust leak seems to be gone, this thing should be done. We can take it out of the garage, take it for a test drive, see how the transmission feels, make sure it doesn't break up under boost, and hopefully have the turbo truck back up and ready to be daily driven again. There's still a little bit of an exhaust leak, but I don't want to pull the threads out of the head. So I think we're gonna have to deal with it for right now. I'm gonna go take it for a test drive and see if it boosts. If there's a ton of boost down, I might have to do something about it. But man, that sucks. I really don't want to pull this all back apart again. The threads on the back of the turbo are getting a little tight. I've already stripped one exhaust bolt. I don't want to strip any of the other ones. Thing is being difficult. Even though there's an exhaust leak, I can still make sure that the transmission sounds good and that it's boosting the way it should be, because even with this small exhaust leak, the turbo's not getting ready to fall off, so it should make more than the 6 pounds it was making prior. All right, we're on our 9 PSI tune-up. The transmission sounds a ton better. Now let's see what we do for boost. Look at that. Not only does the transmission sound better, it makes the proper amount of boost, but it's not breaking up under load, which tells me that the spark plug issue has been resolved. So, all in all, this thing is doing a ton better, and it's drivable again. I'd rather have an exhaust leak than a truck that has a transmission that's going out, breaks up under load, and makes half the boost it's supposed to make. So, this is a win. A win in my book. And with that, we got the turbo truck back. It runs, it drives, the transmission's not failing. It actually boosts the way it's supposed to. It's got a minor exhaust leak, but all in all, I am freaking pumped to have this thing back as my daily. I've been daily driving other things that just aren't as fun. So this thing's awesome. I love it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and I hope to catch you on the next one.